Cassidy Nolan hadn't meant to crash a yacht party, especially not one this extravagant, but fate had other plans. One moment, she was searching for her friend's bachelorette party on the docks, and the next, she was stepping onto the wrong vessel, walking straight into a world she didn't belong in. She barely had time to take in the towering champagne fountains, the glittering chandeliers strung above the open deck, or the sea of elegantly dressed guests before a deep voice cut through the music. "You lost." Cassidy turned, coming face to face with the most striking man she'd ever seen. He was tall, with dark brown hair that looked effortlessly tousled, piercing blue eyes that studied her with mild amusement, and a sharp jawline that made her stomach flip. Cassidy swallowed, suddenly very aware of her simple sundress in a crowd of designer gowns. "I think I might be." My friend's bachelorette party was supposed to be on a yacht, but she glanced around. "I'm guessing this isn't it." The man chuckled, the sound rich and smooth like aged whiskey. "Unless your friend rented a $100 million super yacht, I'd say no." Her heart nearly stopped. $100 million? She had guessed the party was exclusive, but this was on another level. "Let me guess," she said cautiously. "You're the host." His lips quirked up. Brandon Reynolds. The name didn't mean anything to her, but from the way others glanced at him with reverence, she guessed he was someone important. "I'm Cassidy," she said, shifting awkwardly. "I should probably—" Before she could finish, a waiter glided past, nearly colliding with her. She stumbled, eyes widening as she reached out to steady herself, only to find warm, strong hands catching her waist. Brandon's grip was firm but gentle, his touch sending an unexpected shiver through her. "You okay?" "Yeah," she breathed, her pulse racing. Something flickered in his expression, curiosity, maybe even interest. "Stay," he said suddenly. "What?" "You're already here," Brandon pointed out. "Might as well enjoy the night." Cassidy hesitated. She didn't belong in this world of luxury, but something about the way Brandon was looking at her like she was the most intriguing thing he'd seen all evening made it impossible to say no. "All right," she murmured. And just like that, she stepped deeper into a night she'd never forget. An hour later, Cassidy was still trying to wrap her head around how she had ended up sipping champagne on the upper deck of a millionaire's yacht, sitting beside the man himself. "So, you really had no idea who I was?" Brandon asked, his tone light, but there was something in his eyes, something searching. "Nope," she admitted. "Should I?" His lips twitched. "Depends on who you ask." Cassidy raised an eyebrow. "All right, mysterious millionaire. What do you do?" Brandon leaned back, resting his arm on the back of the plush sofa. "I own a few companies." "A few?" she repeated, skeptical. His grin widened. "Fine. A lot." She shook her head, laughing softly. "And here I thought you were just some guy who liked throwing fancy parties." "I do like throwing parties," he admitted. "But I like good company even more." His eyes lingered on her, and Cassidy's breath caught. Before she could respond, a voice interrupted. "There you are, Brandon. We were starting to think you disappeared." A woman in a sleek silver dress approached, her gaze flicking to Cassidy before settling on Brandon with familiarity. Cassidy suddenly felt like an outsider again. Brandon, however, didn't look pleased by the interruption. "Just enjoying the night," he said, his tone polite but distant. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly before she turned back to Cassidy. "And you are?" "Cassidy," she said, forcing a smile. "Cassidy," the woman repeated, drawing out the name like she was testing it. "I don't think we've met before." "You're not usually in this crowd." Cassidy stiffened. She knew what the woman meant. She didn't belong here. Brandon's jaw tightened. "She's my guest." His words were simple, but the weight behind them sent a ripple through the conversation. The woman's expression faltered for a moment before she forced a smile. "Well," she said smoothly, "I suppose that makes you special." Cassidy didn't know how to respond to that, but Brandon didn't give her the chance. "Cassidy," he said, standing and offering his hand. "Dance with me." She blinked. "What?" He nodded toward the makeshift dance floor on the deck, where couples swayed under the soft glow of golden lights. Cassidy hesitated, but the way he was looking at her, like there was no one else he'd rather be with, made her pulse quicken. Slowly, she slipped her hand into his. Brandon led her onto the floor, pulling her close as a slow song played. His hand rested lightly on her waist, his touch sending a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer night air. "You don't have to prove anything," he murmured. Cassidy glanced up. "What do you mean?" His gaze locked onto hers. I saw the way she looked at you. Like you didn't belong. Cassidy swallowed. Maybe I don't. Brandon's grip tightened slightly. You do. Something in his voice, something firm, unwavering, made her heart stutter. She didn't know what she had expected when she stumbled onto this yacht, but it certainly wasn't this. Wasn't him. And yet, as she looked into Brandon Reynolds' piercing blue eyes, she had the strangest feeling that her life was about to change forever. The music swirled around them, the soft melody blending with the gentle lapping of waves against the yacht. Cassidy felt the steady weight of Brandon's hand on her waist, the warmth of his palm sending an unfamiliar thrill through her. She wasn't sure if it was the champagne or his proximity, but she felt lightheaded, unmoored in a way that had nothing to do with the swaying of the boat. You're tense, Brandon observed, his voice low. Cassidy forced a small laugh, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. I don't usually dance at parties like this. He studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his features. You act like you don't belong. She exhaled, glancing beyond his shoulder at the glittering guests who floated across the deck, their conversations laced with the kind of effortless confidence that came from knowing they were untouchable. Because I don't, she admitted. Brandon's hand slid a fraction lower, his fingers brushing the small of her back. Who decides that? She swallowed. People like them. His lips parted slightly, but before he could respond, another voice broke through the intimacy of their moment. There you are, Reynolds. We need a word. A man in a tailored navy suit strode toward them, his expression businesslike but impatient. He barely spared Cassidy a glance, his attention fixed solely on Brandon. Brandon's jaw tightened. He released Cassidy's waist but didn't step away. This isn't the time, Calloway. The man Calloway lifted a brow. It is when investors are asking questions. Cassidy shifted uncomfortably. Whatever was happening, she was clearly in the way. I should probably. Brandon turned to her quickly, his expression softening. Wait for me. The request caught her off guard. There was a quiet intensity in his voice, like he wasn't ready to let her disappear into the crowd. Cassidy hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Brandon gave her a lingering look before following Calloway toward a secluded section of the deck where a small group of sharply dressed men were waiting. Left alone, Cassidy exhaled slowly. The moment was gone, replaced by the stark reality that she was just an outsider who had accidentally stumbled into a world that didn't belong to her. A passing waiter held out a tray of champagne, and she took a glass, sipping it as she wandered toward the railing. The city skyline glittered in the distance, the reflection of the lights shimmering across the dark water. The beauty of it should have been enough to calm her nerves, but instead she felt strangely restless. Enjoying the view? Cassidy turned to see the woman from earlier, the one in the silver dress, approaching. Her expression was pleasant, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it. It's beautiful, Cassidy replied cautiously. The woman hummed, stepping beside her. So, how do you know Brandon? Cassidy hesitated. I don't really. I sort of wandered onto the wrong yacht. The woman's smile sharpened. And he just let you stay? Cassidy nodded, unsure where this was going. Interesting, the woman murmured. Brandon doesn't usually entertain strangers. Especially not ones who aren't. She paused, her gaze flicking over Cassidy's dress. Cassidy stiffened. Not what? The woman took a sip of her drink, her amusement barely concealed. Let's just say he has a type. And it's not usually. She waved a hand vaguely. Cassidy's stomach twisted. She knew what was being implied. Before she could respond, a deep voice cut through the tension. Is there a problem? Brandon was back, his expression unreadable as he looked between them. The woman's demeanor shifted instantly. Not at all, she said smoothly. Just getting to know your guest. Cassidy braced herself for Brandon to correct her, to clarify that she was just someone who had accidentally ended up here. Instead, he slid an arm around Cassidy's waist, his touch firm and deliberate. Cassidy's with me. Surprise flickered through her, but she said nothing. The woman's smile thinned. Of course. Well, enjoy the rest of your evening. She turned gracefully and disappeared into the crowd. Cassidy exhaled. She doesn't like me. Brandon's grip on her waist tightened slightly. She likes control. And she doesn't know what to do with someone she can't categorize. Cassidy tilted her head up at him. And what category do I fall into? His gaze darkened slightly. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. Before she could respond, the yacht's engines rumbled softly, signaling movement. The party was shifting, the vessel beginning a slow, luxurious cruise along the coast. Brandon took her glass from her hand, setting it aside. Come with me. He didn't wait for an answer, leading her through the crowd toward a staircase that spiraled up to a private deck. When they reached the top, Cassidy's breath caught. The space was quieter, more intimate. A curved sofa faced the open sea, the stars stretching endlessly above them. A chilled bottle of champagne sat in a silver bucket, untouched. Brandon turned to her, his expression unreadable. I wanted a moment away from all of that. Cassidy folded her arms. From your own party? He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. From everything that comes with it. She studied him. There was something about Brandon Reynolds that felt complicated. He moved through this world effortlessly, but there was an edge to him, a weight that he carried beneath the charm. What do you want, Brandon? She asked softly. His gaze locked onto hers, something shifting in his expression. Right now? He stepped closer. To know why I can't stop looking at you. Cassidy's breath hitched. She had no answer for him. And maybe she didn't need one. Because when Brandon reached for her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, she didn't pull away. She was already falling. The air between them was charged, the silence thick with unspoken possibilities. Cassidy felt the weight of Brandon's gaze, the intensity of it sinking into her skin like the warmth of the night itself. She wasn't sure if it was the champagne, the ocean air, or the sheer magnetism of the man before her, but she knew one thing: she had never felt like this before. Brandon lifted a hand, his fingers brushing against the curve of her jaw. The touch was barely there, but it sent a shiver through her nonetheless. You make no sense to me, he admitted, his voice quieter now, more raw. Cassidy's pulse quickened. Is that a bad thing? A slow exhale left him. No. But it's dangerous. Her breath hitched. Dangerous how? Brandon's thumb traced a slow, deliberate path along her cheekbone before he let his hand drop. Because I don't do this. She frowned. Do what? His expression was unreadable. The mask slipping just enough for her to see something deeper beneath it. Let people in. Cassidy swallowed. She should have been wary. This man, his world, everything about him was unfamiliar. But she wasn't. She was intrigued. Before she could respond, a gust of wind swept across the deck, making her shiver. Without hesitation, Brandon shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm, carrying the faint scent of his cologne, rich, deep, and undeniably him. Cassidy pulled it tighter around herself. Thank you. Brandon studied her for a moment, then turned toward the railing, resting his hands against it. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, its dark expanse broken only by the shimmering reflection of the city lights in the distance. Do you ever think about leaving? Cassidy asked, stepping beside him. Brandon glanced at her. Leaving what? This, she said, gesturing toward the lavish yacht below, the glittering party still in full swing. The world you live in. The expectations, the constant performances. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but there was no humor behind it. And where would I go? Cassidy shrugged. Anywhere. Somewhere quieter. Where no one cares about your last name or your net worth. Brandon was silent for a moment, then said, Would you? She hesitated. Would I what? Leave everything behind. Cassidy laughed softly, but there was an edge of truth to it. I don't have anything like this to leave. Brandon turned to face her fully. That's not what I meant. She held his gaze. Then what did you mean? He studied her, his expression unreadable. Then after a beat he said, You make me wonder what it would be like. Cassidy's breath caught. The admission was quiet, almost reluctant, but it carried weight. Before she could dwell on it, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. There you are. Brandon turned, his expression shifting instantly into something harder, more controlled. A man in his 40s, dressed impeccably in a dark suit, stood a few feet away. His gaze flicked briefly to Cassidy before settling on Brandon. We need to talk, the man said. Brandon's jaw tightened. Now? The man didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Cassidy took a step back. I should probably. Brandon caught her wrist gently. Stay. Surprise flickered through her. The man gave her another assessing glance but didn't comment. Instead, he turned back to Brandon. The board is getting restless. Your absence is being noticed. Brandon sighed, rubbing his temple. Of course it is. Cassidy folded her arms. You're not just a millionaire, are you? Brandon let out a short, humorless laugh. No, Cassidy. I'm not. The man beside him looked vaguely amused. You actually found someone who doesn't know who you are? Brandon ignored him. Instead, he focused on Cassidy, his expression unreadable. I run a corporate empire. My family built it, and now it's mine to maintain. It's not just money. It's power, influence, responsibility. And it's exhausting. Cassidy absorbed his words. This wasn't just about wealth. It was about expectations, about control. About a man trapped in a golden cage. Brandon turned back to the man. Tell them I'll be down in a minute. The man hesitated, then nodded before disappearing below deck. Cassidy exhaled. Why did you ask me to stay? Brandon stepped closer. Because for the first time in a long while, I don't want to be alone in this. She felt her resolve waver. This was dangerous, getting close to someone like him. But something in his voice, in his eyes, made her want to stay. So she did. Brandon reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. Come with me. This time she didn't hesitate. She followed him down the stairs, back into the glittering chaos of his world. But somehow, with his hand in hers, it didn't feel as daunting. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as out of place as she thought. As Brandon led Cassidy back down into the heart of the party, the energy around them shifted. The yacht was still alight with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of conversation, but Cassidy barely noticed any of it. All she could focus on was the warmth of his hand wrapped around hers, the silent promise in the way his fingers laced through hers with quiet certainty. No one questioned her presence now. No more scrutinizing glances, no more whispered judgments. With Brandon at her side, everything had changed. He guided her toward one of the quieter lounges, a sleek space lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the dark ocean. A pianist played in the corner, a slow, melodic tune that filled the air with something intimate, something unspoken. Brandon turned to face her, his posture unusually still. The weight of whatever conversation he had just left lingered in the set of his shoulders, in the way his jaw tensed for a fraction of a second before he exhaled, letting it go. Cassidy watched him carefully. You don't have to pretend with me. His gaze snapped to hers. What makes you think I am? She tilted her head slightly. Because I've been watching you all night. You wear charm like armor. But when you think no one's looking, you let it slip. Something flickered in his expression. Something unreadable. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. And what do you see when it slips? She hesitated, but only for a moment. Someone who's tired of playing a role he didn't choose. His breath caught, imperceptible to anyone but her. Then, almost as if he couldn't stop himself, he reached up, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. You see too much. Cassidy didn't look away. Maybe you just don't let people see enough. Brandon exhaled, his fingers lingering for a second longer than necessary before dropping away. You're dangerous, Cassidy. She huffed out a soft laugh. I think you said that already. His lips twitched. I meant it. Before she could respond, a server approached, placing 2 glasses of something golden and sparkling on the low glass table beside them. Brandon barely acknowledged it, his attention still fixed entirely on her. Cassidy glanced at the untouched champagne. Do you always drink at these things? He shook his head. Not really, but it's expected. Her brow furrowed. Expected? Brandon let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. Everything in this world is about perception. You drink because they drink. You laugh because they laugh. You stay in control, but just loose enough that no one questions it. She studied him for a long moment. That sounds exhausting. He let out a quiet laugh, but there was no real humor in it. You have no idea. Cassidy hesitated, then reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his once more. His grip tightened instinctively, as if he needed the anchor. Come with me, she said suddenly. Brandon blinked. Where? She didn't answer. Instead, she tugged him toward the exit, slipping through the crowd unnoticed. He didn't resist. They stepped onto the lower deck, where the noise of the party faded into the background. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, the yacht cutting smoothly through the waves. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and the distant hum of the city. Cassidy leaned against the railing, inhaling deeply. Breathe. Brandon arched a brow. I am breathing. She shot him a look. Not like this. He exhaled through his nose, watching her carefully. Then, after a beat, he did as she said. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then quietly he said, "I don't do this." Cassidy turned to him. "Do what?" His gaze met hers, something raw beneath the surface. "Let people pull me away from the noise." She offered him a small, knowing smile. "Maybe you should." Brandon studied her for a long moment, as if trying to figure out what it was about her that made him feel like the world wasn't closing in for once. Then, before he could second-guess it, he reached for her again, pulling her closer. Cassidy's breath hitched as his arms wrapped around her, his warmth sinking into her skin. She wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly his lips were just inches from hers. The space between them charged with something inevitable. Brandon hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me to stop." She didn't. Instead, she closed the gap, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that tasted like salt air and something dangerously addictive. Brandon responded instantly, his hands tightening on her waist as he deepened the kiss, as if he had been waiting for this longer than he was willing to admit. When they finally broke apart, Cassidy was breathless. So was he. Brandon rested his forehead against hers. His voice hushed. "I should warn you, Cassidy." She swallowed. "About what?" He exhaled, his grip on her unwavering. "I don't do temporary." Her heart pounded. "Neither do I." And just like that, everything changed. Brandon's hand remained on Cassidy's waist, the warmth of his touch lingering even as the cool night air wrapped around them. The moment between them had deepened into something neither of them could deny any longer. But the reality of their surroundings crept back in, the distant hum of conversation and music from the party above reminding them of the world waiting for Brandon's return. Cassidy pulled back slightly, her fingers still curled into the fabric of his shirt. "What happens now?" Brandon's gaze didn't waver. "That depends." She searched his expression, looking for hesitation, for the guarded distance he had carried earlier. But there was none. Instead, there was certainty, a quiet, unshakable resolve. Cassidy exhaled, her hands sliding down his chest before she let go. "You have to go back up there, don't you?" His jaw flexed. "For now." She nodded, stepping back. "Then go." Brandon hesitated, as if expecting her to ask for more, to demand something he wasn't ready to give. But when she didn't, when she simply offered him the space to move at his own pace, something in his expression softened. Without another word, he turned and disappeared up the stairs, leaving Cassidy alone with the sound of the waves against the yacht. She inhaled deeply, trying to process everything that had just happened. This wasn't supposed to be her night. She wasn't supposed to be here, in this world, with a man like Brandon Reynolds. And yet she was. And she wasn't ready to walk away. An hour passed before she saw him again. Cassidy had spent the time wandering the edges of the party, avoiding the sharper glances of Brandon's world while sipping a drink she barely tasted. The laughter and conversation flowed around her, but she felt apart from it, an observer rather than a participant. Then, just as she debated whether she should slip quietly off the yacht, she felt it. A shift in the air. She turned, and there he was. Brandon moved through the crowd with effortless confidence, but his eyes were locked on her as if she were the only thing in the room that mattered. When he reached her, he didn't hesitate. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers, and without a word led her away from the party. Cassidy barely had time to process where they were going before they stepped into a private lounge, the noise of the celebration muffled by the closing door. Brandon turned to her, his grip still firm. "I'm done pretending." Cassidy's heart pounded. "Pretending what?" His eyes darkened. "That I don't want this. That I don't want you." She exhaled sharply. "Brandon." "I know it's fast," he interrupted, stepping closer. "I know this night wasn't supposed to happen. But it did. And I don't want it to end when we step off this yacht." Cassidy's breath caught. She had expected hesitation, complications. She hadn't expected this unwavering certainty. She swallowed. "You barely know me." Brandon's lips twitched, but there was no amusement in it, only intensity. "I know enough." Cassidy's pulse thundered in her ears. She had spent the entire night feeling like an outsider, like she didn't belong in this world. But with him right now, none of that mattered. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze head on. "And what if I said I wanted more than just one night?" Brandon's grip on her tightened. "Then I'd say good. Because so do I." The weight of his words settled between them, final and unshakable. Cassidy exhaled slowly, nodding. "Okay." Brandon's lips parted slightly, as if surprised by how easily she accepted it. Then, with a quiet exhale of his own, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then let's figure out what this is," he murmured. Cassidy smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile she had given all night. I think I'd like that. And just like that, everything fell into place. The city lights shimmered in the distance as the yacht drifted toward the dock, signaling the end of the party. But Cassidy wasn't ready for the night to be over. Not when Brandon's hand was still wrapped around hers, grounding her in a reality that felt too surreal to be hers. As the guests began to say their goodbyes, Brandon led her away from the crowd, toward a sleek black car waiting near the pier. The driver opened the back door without a word, stepping aside as Brandon gestured for her to get in. Cassidy hesitated for only a moment before sliding into the plush leather seat. Brandon followed, the door shutting behind him with a quiet finality. The city blurred past as they drove in silence, the energy between them shifting from the rush of the evening into something quieter, something more certain. Cassidy glanced at him. "Where are we going?" Brandon's gaze remained on her, unwavering. "Somewhere we can actually talk," she exhaled, nodding. Whatever this was, whatever they were stepping into, she wasn't about to let doubt ruin it. The car pulled up to a towering glass building, sleek and modern against the night sky. The doorman greeted Brandon with a polite nod before opening the entrance for them. Cassidy stepped inside, taking in the opulent lobby. Polished marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, and a grand chandelier cast a golden glow over the space. But there was no pretense in Brandon's movements. This was simply his world, a world she was now stepping into. The elevator ride was silent, tension crackling between them as they ascended. When the doors slid open, they stepped into a penthouse that overlooked the entire city. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the walls, offering a breathtaking view of the skyline. Brandon loosened the collar of his shirt, watching her reaction. "Do you like it?" Cassidy turned toward him. "It's beautiful." He nodded, stepping closer. "It's also empty. Most nights, I come back to this place and it's just walls and windows." She met his gaze, understanding what he wasn't saying. "And tonight," his fingers brushed against hers. "Tonight, it doesn't feel so empty." Her breath hitched, but she refused to look away. "I don't want to be just another passing moment for you." Brandon's expression darkened slightly, as if the thought of that was unacceptable. "You aren't." There was no hesitation in his voice, no room for doubt. Cassidy knew this wasn't a fleeting attraction, not for either of them. Brandon reached for her hand again, his grip firm and steady. "I don't know how this fits into my life, but I know I want you in it." Cassidy swallowed hard, the sincerity in his words wrapping around her like a promise. "Then we figure it out together." A slow exhale left him, as if those words settled something in him. Then, without another moment of hesitation, he pulled her closer, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was no longer hesitant, no longer uncertain. It was the beginning of something neither of them had planned for, but both of them wanted. And neither of them was willing to let go. Time moved differently after that night. Cassidy had expected resistance from Brandon's world, from the people who saw her as an outsider. And there were challenges, whispers at events, skeptical glances from those who had known Brandon for years. But none of it mattered. Because Brandon never wavered. He took her hand in public, introduced her without hesitation, made it clear to everyone that she wasn't just a passing fascination. And somewhere between stolen moments in his penthouse and late-night drives through the city, she realized she had fallen in love with him. It wasn't the extravagant gestures or the luxury that made her stay. It was him. The way he looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he let her see the parts of him no one else did. And when he pulled her onto a private rooftop one evening, the city lights stretching endlessly below them, she knew something was different. Brandon reached into his pocket, pulling out a velvet box. Cassidy's breath caught. "I never wanted this life to be dictated by expectations," Brandon said, his voice steadier than she had ever heard it. "But if there's one thing I know with absolute certainty, it's that I want you in it. Not just now. Not just for tonight. Forever." He opened the box, revealing a diamond that caught the city lights, reflecting them in a million different colors. Cassidy's hands trembled. "Brandon, marry me." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a grand performance for show. It was simply him laying everything he had at her feet. Cassidy didn't need time to think. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes." Brandon slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms, holding her tightly against him as the city hummed around them. This was real. This was forever. The wedding was intimate, nothing like the over-the-top galas of Brandon's world. It was held in a garden overlooking the ocean, the scent of salt and blooming flowers wrapped around them as they exchanged vows. Brandon's eyes never left hers as he promised her forever, and when he kissed her in front of their closest friends and family, Cassidy knew. She had walked into his world by accident. But staying had been a choice. And loving him? That had always been inevitable.